This week on NES Works, we have the original boomer shooters, as in, let's take these carts out back behind the woodshed and shoot them.
Oh, honey!
Honey, oh, I hope you're as happy about this as I am.
I'm trembling with happiness.
Last time I looked at an officially Nintendo licensed NES game, which was about a year ago. We looked at an American boomer property that a Japanese corporation had exhumed and released for millennials. Strange a creation as Fester's Quest was, I would argue that the Three Stooges is even more difficult to parse. This NES game goes back beyond the boomers. It's a legitimate greatest generation sensation. This is a video game based on a trio of performers who were a media hit back when liquor was illegal in America and the most indulgent treat imaginable for a child amidst a raging economic depression was a single fresh piece of fruit. For kids growing up in the 80s, the Three Stooges may as well have been Geoffrey Chaucer, something from a wildly different time, which had no business being on an NES. I mean, at least our teachers still made us read Tom Sawyer in middle school, so you can almost forgive Seta for that abomination. Speaking as a Generation Xer lurking at the borderline of millennial, someone who owned an NES and avidly kept on top of new releases for the system between 1988 and 1992, the Three Stooges for NES has always struck me as a terrible idea. I distinctly remember seeing this game in a bargain bin for $5 back in the day and thinking, no, I don't think I will. And now that 35 years have passed and I have finally played the Three Stooges for this video, I can confidently say that young me knew what was up. This was not a game designed for me or anyone I could relate to as a peer. It was a game that someone created for die-hard Three Stooges fans. Someone whose idea today of the most indulgent treat imaginable amidst our current economic depression is a soft, stewed pear that won't wreck their dentures. Okay, to be fair, there's bound to be something here for just about anyone who has ever absorbed any sort of televised media over the past half-century. The Three Stooges had a nearly 50-year run as comedy superstars, dealing in a manic sort of slapstick troupe comedy that successfully made the jump from stage to radio to cinema to television. They became icons of the early days of film and TV. The Three Stooges' manic slapstick troupe comedy does not make the jump into video games, but even so, you will recognize something in this game. Even if you're a tiny child whose only exposure to media before K-pop Demon Hunters showed up came in the form of Fortnite collaborations and TikTok skits. The Three Stooges have been referenced, homaged, and satirized by just about everyone. Back in the 80s, the Three Stooges were something that showed up on Saturday afternoon UHF programming blocks. Your grandparents left the Stooges running quietly on a little black and white set, while everyone was doing something more interesting. So certainly the NES cohort knew the Three Stooges, but only because they were background radiation in a media-addled society. And somehow, someone decided that was sufficient basis for an entire NES game based on them. I guess this idea must have made sense to some bean counter somewhere. After all, the Three Stooges appeared in 3 times as many short films and TV episodes as existed for the Addams Family. If Fester's Quest could be a thing kids played, why not Larry, Moe, and Curly? But that's about all the cover I can offer this game. It is, admittedly, not as miserable an experience as I expected back when I saw it cluttering the bargain bins in 1990, but it certainly is not great. And for this creation, we have no one to blame but Cinemaware. You may remember Cinemaware from the Defender of the Crown episode. Cinemaware specialized in creating gorgeous Amiga games that riffed on classic movie tropes. Interactive Sunday afternoon matinees without the stars. Except that the Three Stooges does include the stars. The only Cinemaware creation I'm aware of that was based on an actual existing property instead of consisting of pastiche. Between this and Defender of the Crown, I think it became pretty obvious that Cinemaware's style over substance approach, handled once again by Australian studio Beam, didn't sit well on a console that couldn't quite handle the style part. As with so many Cinemaware creations, the Three Stooges attempts to condense the essence of the property into a succession of minigames that play nothing alike. Mario Party with more eye gouging. This is kind of the classic UK computer problem for the post-8-bit era. Games that try to create an experience with a huge variety of unique minigames and which end up feeling disjointed and awkward as a result. The Three Stooges does have a framing element to tie everything together. The Stooges need to raise a bunch of cash in order to save an orphanage within a set amount of time, and each event you play accounts for 1 day of the deadline. You select events through a sort of pressure luck style board game randomizer, which can sometimes lead you to wasted days where you do nothing, and sometimes a mousetrap will snap on your hand while selecting a game. It's comedy, I guess. The games involve absolutely bizarre tasks that often lack any sort of in-game explanation or justification for the objectives they involve. The most egregious of these is the boxing match, in which Curly enters the ring in the background while you control Larry as he dashes to the radio shop and back to the boxing ring before Larry's 6th round ends. This makes no sense if you haven't seen the short Punch Drunks, where you discover that Curly can transform into a fighting machine by playing Pop Goes the Weasel on his violin. When the violin is damaged in a comedic fracas, Larry has to rush to acquire a radio to sub in the tunes to keep Curly alive against champion boxer Killer Kilduff. In fairness, Punch Drunks was inducted into the ranks of the US National Film Registry, so it's officially considered a piece of meaningful Americana. So, I guess that it's something you'd need to be familiar with in order to consider yourself media literate, and therefore, this minigame should make sense. But I'm not sure how many 9-year-olds were studying the Library of Congress in 1989, so Activision had to have been aiming for something besides the core NES audience here. Especially when you consider that pretty much every event hinges on the player's familiarity with the Stooges. Heck, there's even a trivia event that consists of nothing but Stooges questions. If you don't know their film Oov, good luck understanding the premise of a cracker-eating minigame, or that one where you rush through a hospital. The only event that really stands on its own is the pie contest, where the Stooges line up along a table opposite a bunch of stern knobs and throw pies at the other side while ducking incoming pastries. It's a pretty good premise for a minigame, let down only by the fact that the NES controller doesn't really have enough inputs to allow you to elegantly make 3 different characters duck and throw pies independently at the same time. But honestly, this game is fairly pointless for anyone who's not a fan of the Three Stooges. It's funny because the Three Stooges suffers from the opposite problem that plagued most 8-bit games based on external properties. So many of those amounted to random, unrelated games hastily hacked by developers to feature superficial signifiers of the related property. The Three Stooges goes all in on the property by stringing together interactive renditions of scenes from the old shorts. But there's just not enough storage space or design grace available on NES to give these scenes the context they need to land for newcomers to the property. And let's face it, the average tween in 1989 would have had some passing familiarity with the Stooges, but wouldn't necessarily have watched the specific media required to make sense of these minigames. I guess the random slap fight event that sometimes pops up was for them. But in short, if you're not a fan of the Three Stooges, this love letter to the characters and their films is a pretty rough play. It certainly doesn't help that Cinemaware made a concerted effort to include lots of Stooges-related audio and visual components to, I guess, delight fans? The digitized film stills looked pretty impressive at the time, and I have to admit that Beam managed to bring those over from the computer versions quite effectively. Less appealing are the audio samples, which are numerous, unfortunately. The Three Stooges makes use of the NES's noise channel to play back incredibly scratchy, low bitrate clips of game audio, which can be both intrusive and annoying. Anyone who has experienced the cracker-eating minigame knows what I'm talking about. Every few seconds, the action, such as it is, pauses to show a digitized still of Curly staring at a bowl of soup as the game emits a hideous, shrieking sample. Honestly, the only time the samples land are with the startup screen, which displays a title screen for Ghostbusters 2 before the Stooge sprites wander in and lament being in the wrong game. It's a pretty good bit, and it worked even better at the time since Activision hadn't quite released the NES version of Ghostbusters 2 yet. It must have caused quite a double take. But still, when your best material plays out before the game actually begins, it's not a great testament to your work. I think Beam did the best you could reasonably expect with the material they were handed, but the material is not great to begin with and makes for a pretty unappealing NES cartridge. Since the events here are more arcadey than those of Defender of the Crown, and you don't have to worry about a mediocre strategy sim in between disjointed minigames, I guess it's fine. but there's not a huge amount of replay value once you get a handle on the controls for each event, despite the inclusion of a 2-player mode. The Three Stooges might not be quite as bad as I assumed as a kid, but that's faint praise, since I assumed it was absolutely wretched. It's less wretched and more like a simple waste of cartridge space. I suppose its existence offered kids a tactical opportunity to convince their purse-string controlling elders to buy an NES. I'd like an NES and some good games, Mom and Dad, and you can get the Three Stooges because your sense of humor is still stuck in the Great Depression. Too bad for Activision that Tetris and Dr. Mario were just around the corner, and once they arrived, parents would need no additional coaxing to support the NES, though getting them off the NES could be tricky. Well, at least this next game recalibrates the NES time window a little closer to what was then the present day. Hollywood Squares is very much rooted in the 1960s, but that still makes it fresher than a series and franchise that debuted before World War II. And in fairness, Hollywood Squares was an active television property at the time that this game debuted. Well, almost. That's quite unlike the Three Stooges, whose last film had debuted in 1970, nearly 2 full decades before the NES game. Still, Hollywood Squares really has that 1960s vibe, you know? It's a loose, low-impact game show whose overall feel has always reminded me of variety programs like Hee Haw and Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, which, it should be noted, both launched in the 60s, but were still broadcast pretty frequently in 1989 syndication. Actually, they were apparently still making new Hee Haws at that point, tragically enough. Anyway, Hollywood Squares was the rare game show that placed its focus less on the contestants or the host, emphasizing instead its panel of celebrity guests. And that is why the NES game fails. Developer Rare, or whatever underpaid subcontractor they roped into this project, puts forth a commendable effort, but you just can't recreate the appeal of Hollywood Squares in an 8-bit game. I think you'd have trouble making it work on a modern platform, to be honest. Hollywood Squares challenges 2 contestants to master a tic-tac-toe grid in a battle of trivia. Now, that part, the NES handled easily enough. However, the challenge comes in the execution. See, rather than simply answer trivia questions themselves, Hollywood Squares competitors instead try to determine whether or not the answers to the questions provided by celebrity guests who occupy the tic-tac-toe board are correct. The Hollywood Squares referenced in the title. I have never once seen an episode of Hollywood Squares featuring a major celebrity. The appeal really came from the way the show rounded up a bunch of B through Z-listers, the kind of bit actors and comedians who never headlined their own show, then allowing them to gently antagonize one another and the contestants. The idea was that the player would pick a square on the board, and then the host, most recently John Davidson, who had carved himself a niche as a mainstay of second-string quiz game, would then read a trivia question to the celebrity occupying that square. The celebrity would riff a bit before making an earnest attempt to answer the question, and the contestant would either agree or disagree with their assessment. A correct answer would flip that square to the player's tic-tac-toe symbol, while flubbing it would give the square to their competitor. It's not much of a game, but again, the point was really the quips and bawdy but syndication-friendly banter of minor celebrities like Joan Rivers and Howard Stern. You may find this hard to believe, but an NES game can't really do improv. Hollywood Squares for NES does contain a lot of questions, but each of them is followed up with a canned response and an attempted answer. From what I can tell, the canned responses are the same regardless of which celebrity you select, which is fine since you're not picking actual celebrities. GameTek, the company too miserly to pay for likeness rights for both Pat Sajak and Vanna White in their Wheel of Fortune adaptation, sure didn't want to pony up for 9 different minor celebrities. So instead, you just get a bunch of goofy-looking weirdos with identical senses of humor. Hollywood Squares on NES captures the mechanics of the show, but not its soul. Yes, the rule set works, but the chaotic dynamic of the semi-variety show format does not translate into 128K of NES data. God bless whoever was handed the task of making that happen, because they tried rolling an impossible boulder up the hill here. Sadly, that modern Sisyphus did not survive the ordeal. Heck, even the TV show couldn't seem to capture the magic of the show's original run. The 80s incarnation that inspired this game had actually been canceled just a few months before the cartridge shipped. That's rough luck, GameTek. Almost as brutal as the time Absolute shipped a baseball game featuring Pete Rose for Atari 7800 a few weeks after Rose was banned from the sport. Video games, man, they're no place for someone who wants to live a calm and happy life. And what did Nintendo Power say? Who cares? Next time on NES Works, November is here, and that means we're in the thick of hurricane season.